Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props. Now, my daughter is a huge Five Nights at Freddy's fan, and with the movie coming out, I thought it'd be a fantastic time to make something from the series. But with all my other Halloween builds, time was running short. So I knew I couldn't make a giant costume piece, so I figured I'd make a little prop. So in this video, I'm going to be putting together the Nightmare Cupcake. And the thing I love about this is it's not super detailed, it's not a giant costume piece. Making a little prop like this could go along with your costume, or if you're just a fan of the series, you could definitely make this and just have it sitting on your desk. Now, this little guy is of course made all out of my HD foam and foam clay, both which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. And if you would like to make your own, I of course have free PDF files available over on my website that you can download to build right along with me. So in this video, I want to show you what it takes to put this little cupcake together and paint it. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start by taking parts 1 through 6 and cutting all of these out of some 6mm foam. After all the pieces have been cut out, some weldwood contact cement is going to be applied to all of the edges that will be pressed together. Now for the assembly of this, I've recorded almost the entire process just so you can see how all of these pieces go together. I would recommend to start at the bottom and work your way to the top, matching all of the openings along the way. Once you get to the top, you're going to notice that some pieces have points at the end and some pieces don't. This is going to help to put all of the pieces together in the correct order. My recommendation would be, as you're assembling the dome, to pause the video to see how all of the pieces go together. Now it's time to clean up the seams, remove excess foam, and round over all of the edges using a smooth sanding drum on my rotary tool. Throughout this process, I'm not really concerned about my seams being perfect because I'm going to cover this with a layer of foam clay. After heat sealing, I press the foam in at the top. This is where the candle is going to go. And to help retain the shape, I'm going to glue a small strip of 2mm foam to the inside while the foam is pressed in. Now that my dome is assembled and the seams are cleaned up, to give the top of this cupcake some texture, I'm going to be applying some foam clay. Water is added to the surface, and this is going to help the foam clay stick to the dome. Now I don't need to add a lot, just enough to cover some of the seams that I'm not happy with and to give it some additional volume. To give the foam clay a little texture before it's dried, I'm going to press a ball of tin foil into the surface. When you're sculpting with foam clay, always exaggerate your details, because as the material dries it shrinks, and so some of the details can disappear. To continue the texture that I added to the foam clay, I reheat the foam and then using the same tin foil ball, press it into the surface. To assemble his upper jaw, I'm going to use part A. This is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Some detail lines are sanded into the surface using my rotary tool before this piece can be heat sealed. Heat is added to manipulate the foam, and then the two ends can be glued together to complete a circle. This piece is marked with a pencil and then using super glue adhered to the inside of the dome. Part B is going to make up the lower jaw, and it can also be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Just like part A, after being sanded and heated, the two ends can be glued together. To make up the bottom of my cupcake, part C is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Super glue is going to be applied to the edge of this piece, and then it can be pressed into place. Now it's time to add some teeth to the build, and to do that I'm going to be using some 10mm HD foam round dowels. The dowels are cut to approximately 1 3/4 inches, and then each one is sanded and heat sealed. With the teeth complete, I can now glue 9 of them to the bottom jaw using super glue. Part D is going to be cut out of 10mm foam, and this is a small ledge that will be glued to the inside that the upper teeth are going to adhere to. His eyes are going to be made by using a ping pong ball cut in half, as well as some remote control LED tea lights that I was able to pick up off Amazon. To give the eye an iris, I'm going to glue a small washer to the surface. Because the light is right in the middle, it casts a shadow on the inside of the ping pong ball. The ping pong ball half can now be glued to the top of the tea light. Now I know it's really bright on camera, but in person it looks great. To make up the skeletal structure on the inside of the cupcake, I'm going to start by taking part E and cutting that out of some 10mm foam 3 times. Now using some 10mm spacers, each circle is placed in equal distance apart. The small spacers will be up front in between the eyes, and the larger spacers will be in the back. This same process is also applied to part F and part G. And now I can do a test fit to make sure that all of this fits inside of the cupcake just right. Before gluing this into place, I'm going to trim away some of the foam, that way the tea light eyes sit flush. Super glue is applied, and then the skeletal structure can be inserted into the dome. With it in place, I can glue the front of the circle to part D and the back of the circle to the back of the dome, making sure to leave gaps on the sides. The reason I left gaps is I'm going to be using some 3/8 poplar dowels to support the jaw. 2 sections will be cut to 3 inches and 2 sections will be cut to 3.5. All of these dowels will then be glued to the bottom of the cupcake, making sure the shortest ones are in the back. The dowels will go up through the gaps on the sides and be glued into place to keep the mouth open. I'm going to be using some armature wire for some structural support for the flame at the top of the candle. The candle itself will be made out of some 5/8 poplar dowel cut to about 1.75 inches. 3 layers of 10mm foam can now be glued together, and this is going to make up the base material for the flame. Part H can now be traced onto the foam to give us a general shape, and this can be rough cut using an X-Acto blade. A rotary tool is then used to refine the shape, and the whole thing is heat sealed. Using a Forstner bit, I drill a small indentation into the top of the dome, and then the candle can be super glued into place. I'm going to get out my respirator and my heat tool because I want to add some details to more closely match the game. But remember, whenever you're heating foam, to protect yourself and make sure to work in a well-ventilated area. Small blocks of 10mm foam can now be super glued to the back end of the tea lights. This will make the eyes adjustable, but more importantly removable to change the batteries. With assembly complete, I can now start to prime and paint my cupcake. I'm going to start with a few light layers of Plasti-Dip. With the Plasti-Dip cured, I'm going to dust the surface with some Krylon Red Oxide Primer. This just gives us a little bit of color to work with so we can put additional layers on top. For the icing on the cupcake, I'm going to be using Liquitex brand Medium Magenta. This is going to be applied over the entire surface with a 1-inch mop brush, and it's slightly watered down. I can then switch over to a smaller filbert brush for all of the holes and the bottom of the icing. For the main body of the cupcake, I'm going to be using Liquitex brand Raw Sienna. This is applied with a smaller brush just to make sure I don't get it onto the parts that I've already painted. Now it's time to highlight, so I go back with more medium magenta, but this time no water. This is dry brushed onto the surface, only hitting the highlights. Same technique is also used for the bottom of the cupcake, but using raw sienna. Raw sienna is also applied to the flame and the candle. For the metallic sections on this build, I'm going to be using Liquitex Iridescent Rich Silver. Because it's a metallic, I'm not using any water, and I'm stippling it onto places where I want the metal to show through. Now notice I'm not covering all of my red primer. This is going to give it a little bit of a rusty, corroded look. To paint the teeth, I'm going to start by applying some Liquitex parchment to the tip of each tooth. Then I'm going to remove most of the paint from the brush, and I'm going to feather the pigment up the tooth to give it a more gradual transition. For the candle, I'm going to mix some of the parchment and raw sienna together. This is dry brushed onto the surface, again not covering it completely, allowing some of that primer to show through. For the flame on top, I'm going to be applying some Liquitex Cadmium Free Orange. This is also just dry brush, allowing you to see some of the colors below. I felt that the body of the cupcake needed a little bit more of a highlight, so I mixed more of the parchment and raw sienna together, and then I applied that with a filbert brush. Again, the thing to note, no water is added because you only want to dry brush the highlights on the surface. Liquitex Mars Black can now be applied to the back and sides of the tea lights. Liquitex Iridescent Rich Silver is also applied to these sections. And to give the prop a scraped metal look, more Liquitex Iridescent Rich Silver is applied to the surface. But notice that I'm only using the side of the brush and I'm only hitting edge highlights. This is going to make it look as though the paint has been scraped away in certain areas. And it's all the different layers of paints put together that give the prop a more realistic look. For a final touch, I decided to add some perma-blood to the teeth. This is applied to the surface using a small detail brush, but I don't apply a lot, I just want to give it a splash of color and a little bit different sheen. With the cupcake assembled and painted, I'd call this project done. And it was a lot of fun to work on this small little prop, and hopefully you enjoyed this process. So you all can see the steps that I took to put together my own custom version of the Nightmare Cupcake from Five Nights at Freddy's. And again, if you would like to make your own, free PDF files are available over on my website that you can download to build right along with this video. And if you are building any of my builds or using HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing what you guys create. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.